He lost his marriage, his home, and walked away with almost nothing. But his dog refused to let him leave one place behind. A forgotten lake house, a name he hadn't spoken in years, and something buried beneath it. He thought he was starting over. He didn't know he was walking back into a life meant for him. Because sometimes, when everything is taken from you, God is just clearing the path to something greater. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and if this story moves you, like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The morning light came in clean and quiet, the way it always had. It slipped through the wide glass panels of the suburban kitchen, soft and golden, laying itself across the marble island where Rowan Hale stood with both hands braced against the edge. Outside, the neighborhood looked like a brochure. Trimmed lawns, silent driveways, a sky too blue to argue with. Inside, something older than anger had already ended. Rowan was 43 years old. He stood a little over 6 feet tall, shoulders broad from years of disciplined training. The kind of build that never quite left a man, even after the uniform was folded away. And his face was cut in hard lines. Strong jaw, faint scars that most people wouldn't notice unless they were looking for them. A short, dark military haircut framed eyes the color of storm-washed steel. Blue-gray, steady, and far away. Stubble shadowed his jaw, not careless, just unbothered. He wore the same thing he always wore now. An olive field jacket worn soft at the seams, a red and dark blue plaid shirt beneath it, dark cargo pants, and boots that had seen more ground than most people ever would. On his left wrist, a scratched military watch ticked with quiet persistence. Across from him stood Claire Hale. Claire was the kind of woman who never looked unfinished. Early 40s, tall and composed, her posture effortless and deliberate. Her coat, a long tailored piece in a pale beige, fell perfectly along her frame, untouched by the morning chill. Her hair, a soft shade between blonde and light brown, was styled neatly, and her skin carried that careful, polished calm of someone who understood how she was seen. She wasn't cruel. That was the complicated part. She was simply certain. She slid the folder across the counter. "I had the attorney finalize everything," she said. Her voice was steady, practiced, not cold, but controlled. "It's cleaner this way." Rowan didn't open it right away, and he had spent years in places where hesitation could get someone killed. And yet now, standing in his own kitchen, he let the moment stretch. Not out of fear, out of something quieter, a kind of final listening. At his feet, Ash shifted. The German Shepherd was 5, maybe 6 years old. His body was all function, lean muscle beneath a thick black and tan coat, his stance balanced even at rest. His ears were upright, catching everything. His eyes, dark, intelligent, unsettlingly focused, moved not between objects, but between people. He wasn't looking at the room. He was reading it. Ash didn't lie down. He stayed on all fours, weight slightly forward, as if the air itself had changed density. Rowan noticed that. He always noticed that. Claire continued, filling the silence the way people do when they're uncomfortable with it. "The house stays with me. It always has been under my name, so that's straightforward. The accounts have been divided. You'll see the breakdown in Section 3. It's fair, Rowan." Fair. It was an interesting word. Rowan reached forward, pulled the folder toward him, and opened it. He didn't skim. He read each page slowly, methodically, his finger unconsciously tracing each line as if muscle memory had followed him out of the military and into this kitchen. Dissolution of marriage. Asset allocation. Transitional support. The language was clean, efficient, almost polite, like closing a file. His hand didn't shake. He had expected it might. Some part of him had braced for it. The tremor, the surge, the wave breaking over him all at once. But nothing came. Just a quiet, steady presence inside his chest, like a voice that had been waiting years to speak. He closed the folder. "I won't contest it," he said. Claire blinked. Not dramatically, just enough to reveal she had prepared for resistance, for raised voices, for something human and messy and difficult. Instead, Rowan gave her something simple. "I'll be out in 3 weeks," he added. "You can have the rest handled through your attorney." Ash exhaled softly. Not relief. Recognition. Claire nodded, slower this time. "That would be best." She gathered her coat, adjusting the sleeve as she moved. For a brief second, her eyes rested on Rowan's face, searching, perhaps, for something she had expected to see. He didn't give it to her. When the front door closed behind her, the house didn't feel empty. It felt released. Rowan stood there a while longer, listening to the silence settle. The refrigerator hummed. A car passed somewhere down the street. The morning continued, indifferent. Then he moved, and packing took less time than he thought it would. He didn't argue with objects. That was something he had learned long ago. Don't negotiate with weight you don't need to carry. He took what mattered, which turned out to be very little. Clothes, but only the practical ones. The field jacket stayed on. The boots stayed on. A small box of photographs, most of them from before Claire, before the house, before the life that now felt like it had belonged to someone else. His mother's picture sat on top. He hesitated there, just once, before placing it gently inside. Ash followed him from room to room, silent, attentive. At one point, Rowan found himself standing in the garage, staring at a set of tools he had barely used in years. He almost reached for them. He didn't. Back inside, he moved through the last of the drawers, papers, manuals, unopened mail. And then, a folded document, tucked beneath a stack of outdated warranties. Old paper, yellowed at the edges. Rowan almost ignored it. Almost. Ash didn't. The dog stepped forward, nose lowering, inhaling deeply. Then, with a small but deliberate motion, he placed his paw on the paper. Not scratching, not playing, holding. Rowan paused. "Yeah?" he muttered quietly. Ash didn't move. Rowan picked up the document. It was a property deed, not recent, not connected to anything in the house. His eyes scanned the heading. Eleanor Hale, Lake Property Transfer. The name hit first. Eleanor, his grandmother. The location followed, a rural address in northern Wisconsin, near a lake he hadn't seen in over a decade. A place spoken about rarely, almost dismissively, at family gatherings. Too far, too small, not worth anything. He remembered it differently. The smell of wood and water. The sound of wind through trees that never seemed to stop moving. Rowan turned the paper over, as if expecting more. There wasn't. He stood there, the document in his hand, the house around him fading into something temporary, already behind him. He walked toward the trash bin, opened the lid, paused. Ash moved closer. The dog didn't bark, didn't whine. He just looked up. And in that look, steady, unwavering, there was something Rowan had learned to trust long before he learned to trust people. Not urgency, certainty. Rowan exhaled slowly. "All right," he said under his breath, though he wasn't sure who he was answering. He lowered the paper, closed the trash lid, set the document on the counter instead. For the first time that morning, something shifted. Not in the room, but inside him. Not hope, not yet. Just direction. Ash finally relaxed, lowering himself to the floor, though his eyes never left Rowan. Rowan picked up the keys to his truck, the old one, the one Claire never liked. He didn't look back at the house as he stepped outside. He didn't need to, because for the first time since the morning began, he wasn't thinking about what he had lost. He was thinking about where the road might go. He didn't know why that piece of paper mattered, but he knew one thing with a certainty that felt older than logic. He wasn't throwing it away. Rowan drove north without checking the map twice. The truck was old, the kind that carried its history in the sound of its engine. Low, steady, a little rough around the edges. It suited him. There was no navigation voice telling him where to go, just a folded paper map on the passenger seat, weighed down by the lake property deed, and Ash beside it, watching the road as if it were something alive. The city disappeared slowly. First the buildings thinned, then the traffic loosened. Then the air itself seemed to change. Cooler, cleaner, carrying the scent of wet soil and thawing ground. And by the time Rowan crossed into the northern stretch of Wisconsin, the world had opened into long stretches of forest and quiet roads that curved like they had been shaped by memory, not design. Rowan didn't rush. He drove the way he used to move on patrol, aware, measured, leaving space for the unexpected. Ash shifted once, adjusting his weight, then settled again. His posture was different now. Not tense like before, not relaxed either. Alert, but not anxious. As if he recognized this kind of place, Rowan noticed. "You've been here before?" he muttered, one hand on the wheel. Ash didn't react, but his ears tilted forward slightly. That was enough. They passed through small towns that barely registered as towns. One gas station, one diner, a row of houses that looked like they had been there longer than anyone currently living in them. Rowan stopped once, just long enough to fill the tank and buy coffee that tasted like it had been brewed since dawn. The woman behind the counter didn't ask questions. She was in her 60s, short and sturdy, with silver hair pulled into a tight bun and hands that moved with practiced efficiency. Her eyes flicked once to Rowan's jacket, then to Ash. "Dogs trained," she said, not as a question. "Yes, ma'am." She nodded, as if that explained everything. Maybe it did. Rowan took the coffee, paid in cash, and left without another word. Back on the road, the silence returned. It wasn't empty. It was the kind of silence that let things rise. Memories came, but not the ones he expected. Not Claire. Not the house, not the argument that never happened. Instead, he remembered a lake, not clearly, just fragments, a dock that creaked under his weight when he was a kid, a hand on his shoulder, large, steady, guiding him without forcing, the smell of wood smoke and something sweet he couldn't name back then, his grandmother's voice, not what she said, just the sound of it. Rowan tightened his grip on the wheel slightly. He hadn't thought about her in years, not because he didn't care, because somewhere along the way, he had learned not to go back to places that couldn't follow him forward. The road curved again, deeper into the trees. Ash lifted his head. Not suddenly, not sharply, just enough to change the air in the truck. Rowan glanced at him. "What is it?" Ash's gaze had shifted, not to the road, but slightly off to the right, toward the tree line. His nose moved once, drawing in scent. His body leaned just a fraction, as if something beyond the visible had caught his attention. Rowan slowed the truck without thinking. There was nothing there. Just trees. Pine and cedar, thick and quiet, still. Ash didn't look away, and Rowan let the truck roll a little slower, then brought it back up to speed. "All right," he said quietly. "I see it." He didn't know what it was. but he trusted the signal. They drove for another hour before the road narrowed into something less maintained. Gravel replaced asphalt. The trees pressed closer, taller now, older. The sky filtered through in broken pieces. The address on the paper matched the sign at the turnoff. Larkspur Lake Road. The sign was tilted, paint chipped, like it had been ignored long enough to forget it mattered. Owen turned onto it. The truck moved slower now, tires crunching over gravel and loose stone. The branches arched overhead, forming a loose tunnel of green and shadow. The deeper they went, the more the outside world seemed to fall away, not disappear but recede, like a tide pulling back. Ash stood up. This time, there was no mistaking it. He moved forward in the seat, front paws braced, eyes fixed ahead. Rowan felt something tighten in his chest, not fear, recognition. The road dipped, curved once more, and then the trees opened. The house stood at the edge of the lake like it had been waiting. It was smaller than Rowan remembered. Or maybe he had been smaller then. The structure leaned slightly to one side, not dangerously, but enough to show time had worked on it without interruption. The wood siding had faded to a deep, weathered red. The roof sagged in one corner. The front porch tilted, its steps uneven, one board cracked clean through. But it was still standing. Behind it, the lake stretched out, wide, still, reflecting the sky in a way that made it look deeper than it was. The water wasn't bright. It was clear, honest. To the right of the house, set back just a little, stood a small wooden shed. Its door hung slightly ajar. The structure leaned more than the house did, like it had almost given up, but hadn't quite finished the decision. Rowan cut the engine. Silence dropped in immediately. No traffic, no distant noise, just wind moving through trees and the faint sound of water touching the shore. Ash didn't wait. He jumped out of the truck the moment Rowan opened the door, landing lightly on the gravel and pausing just long enough to orient himself. Then he moved. Not running. Walking with purpose. Rowan followed more slowly. The ground felt different under his boots, softer, uneven, real in a way pavement never was. Each step carried weight, not just physically, but something else. Like stepping into a place that remembered you even when you didn't remember it properly. He reached the porch. The wood creaked under him, protesting but holding. He opened the door. It stuck for a moment, then gave way. The smell hit first. Cedar, old fabric, dust layered over memory. The air inside wasn't stale. It was still, like it had been waiting for movement. Rowan stepped in. Light filtered through the windows in narrow beams, catching dust in the air. The furniture remained where it had been left, covered in sheets that had once been white. A couch, a table, a chair near the window that faced the lake. Nothing had been taken. Nothing had been touched. Ash moved past him, slower now. He circled once in the center of the room, nose low, reading everything. Then he stopped. Not at the door, not at the windows, at the far wall, the fireplace. Rowan watched him. Ash stepped closer, each movement controlled. He lowered his head, inhaled deeply, then took one step back. And then, a low, quiet growl. Not aggressive, not defensive. Warning. Rowan felt it immediately. That old instinct. The one that didn't come from thinking. He moved toward Ash, stopping just short of the fireplace. Nothing looked wrong. Stone intact, mantle undisturbed, ashes long cold. But the air felt different here, denser. Rowan crouched slightly, eyes narrowing, scanning not just what he could see, but what didn't fit. Ash didn't move. His body was still but ready. Rowan reached out slowly, placing his hand against the stone. Cold, solid, normal. And yet, he pulled his hand back. "Not tonight," he said quietly. Ash looked at him. The growl faded, but the tension didn't. Rowan straightened, the house creaked softly around them, settling into their presence. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he added under his breath. "I feel it too." Ash wasn't reacting to something that was there. He was reacting to something that didn't belong. Rowan didn't explore further. Not because he wasn't curious, because he understood something most people didn't. You don't push into unknown ground when you don't understand the terrain yet. He backed away from the fireplace. Ash followed, though he glanced back once, just long enough to mark the place. Rowan moved to the couch, pulled the sheet off, and sat down. The fabric underneath was worn, but intact. The house wasn't ruined. It had just been paused. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. For a long moment, he didn't think about the past, and he didn't think about Claire. He didn't think about what came next. He just sat there. Ash lowered himself beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Outside, the light shifted toward evening. The lake reflected it without comment. Rowan let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since the morning. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he said quietly. Ash didn't answer. He didn't need to, because for the first time in a long time, Rowan didn't feel like he was standing in the wrong place. Morning arrived quietly, as if it understood the house needed time. The light came through the tall windows in long, pale beams, settling across the wooden floorboards like it had done for decades before Rowan ever stepped back inside. Outside, the lake held its stillness, a sheet of glass broken only by the occasional ripple of wind. Rowan was already awake. He hadn't slept deeply, but he hadn't fought the night either. That was something. He sat at the edge of the couch, boots on, elbows resting on his knees, staring at nothing in particular. The house felt different in daylight, less like a place frozen in time, and more like something waiting to be understood. Ash moved first. The German shepherd rose from where he had been lying near the door, stretching his front legs forward, muscles shifting beneath his coat. His ears were up again, scanning, listening, not tense, but alert in a way that suggested he was adjusting, recalibrating. Rowan watched him. "You're still thinking about it," he said quietly. Ash didn't respond, but his gaze drifted briefly toward the deeper part of the house before returning to Rowan. Not forgotten, just filed away. Rowan stood. The air was cold enough to bite lightly at his skin, and when he stepped outside, the scent hit him again. Wet wood, thawing soil, something faintly metallic beneath it. The kind of smell that didn't belong to cities. He stepped off the porch carefully, testing each board without looking down. Old habit. Trust the structure, but verify. The yard stretched out in front of him, uneven and overgrown. Grass had pushed through gravel. A rusted wheelbarrow leaned against a tree like it had been set down and never picked up again. And then, a sound. An engine. Rowan turned. A truck rolled slowly into view from the road, older than his but better maintained, the kind that had been repaired more times than replaced. It came to a stop a few yards away, dust settling behind it. The door opened. A woman stepped out. Mara Bellamy hadn't changed as much as time should have allowed. She stood around 5'8", lean and built for movement rather than display. Her moss-green Ranger parka hung naturally on her frame, worn but cared for, and beneath it a gray sweater peeked out at the collar. Her dark outdoor pants were tucked into waterproof boots that had seen real terrain, not decoration. Her hair, chestnut brown, was pulled back low, practical, with loose strands catching the light. Her face carried sharp lines, softened by something quieter. Experience, maybe, or restraint. Her eyes found Rowan immediately. "Rowan Hale," she said. Not a question. Rowan gave a small nod. "Mara." She walked closer, hands tucked into her jacket pockets, her steps steady, deliberate. Up close, her gaze lingered on his face for a moment, taking in the weight he carried without asking for an explanation. "You got thinner," she said. It wasn't an insult. It was an observation. Rowan let out a faint breath that might have been the beginning of a smile. "Yeah." Mara glanced past him toward the house, then toward the lake. "Didn't think you'd come back," she said. "Didn't plan to." "That's usually how it works." Ash stepped forward then, placing himself slightly between Rowan and Mara. Not aggressively, but with awareness. Mara noticed immediately. Her eyes dropped to the dog. "German Shepherd," she said. "Working line." Rowan nodded. "K9. Mara crouched slightly, not reaching, not invading space, just lowering herself enough to meet Ash at eye level without challenging him. "Hey," she said softly. Ash didn't approach. But he didn't pull back either. After a moment, he blinked once, slow. That was permission enough. Mara stood again. "He's good," she said. "Not just trained, thinking." Rowan didn't answer. He didn't need to. A second engine cut through the air before silence could settle again. This one louder, rougher. Rowan turned just as another vehicle came up the road, a faded brown pickup that looked like it had been held together by habit more than maintenance. It stopped harder than Mara's had. The door opened with a creak. Otis Wren stepped out like he had all the time in the world. He was in his early 70s, though age sat on him unevenly. His back was slightly curved, but his movements were deliberate, never rushed. His face was a map of years. Deep lines, weathered skin, eyes the pale blue of cold mornings. His gray hair was thin but stubborn, combed back without much concern for precision. He wore the same thing he probably wore most days, a brown canvas jacket faded at the elbows, a flannel shirt underneath, dark work pants, and boots that had outlived several owners. In one hand he carried a small metal toolbox. In the other, a tin wrapped in cloth. He looked at Rowan for a long moment before speaking. "Eleanor's boy," he said. Rowan straightened slightly. "Grandson," he corrected. Otis nodded once. Close enough. He walked past them without waiting for an invitation, stepping onto the porch and testing the boards with the toe of his boot. "This'll give in another winter," he said casually. Then he turned back, holding up the tin slightly. "Apple bread," he added. "My sister used to make it. Figured someone should keep the tradition honest." Rowan stepped forward, taking the tin. "Thank you." Otis waved it off. "Don't thank me yet," he muttered. "You'll need help before you need food." Mara leaned lightly against the truck beside her, watching the exchange with a faint, knowing look. Otis turned his attention fully to Rowan now. "She didn't leave this place to just anyone," he said. Rowan met his gaze. "I didn't even know she left it." Otis studied him for a moment longer. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That tracks." He glanced toward the lake. "Your grandmother wasn't poor," he added. "She just didn't measure wealth the way most people do." Rowan said nothing, because something in that sentence felt like it belonged somewhere deeper than conversation. They got to work without making a plan. Otis handed Rowan a hammer like he expected him to know what to do with it. Mara pulled on gloves and started clearing debris from the porch without asking. Ash moved between them, observing. At first it was simple. loose boards, rusted nails, dust and rot. Rowan worked with steady hands, but not perfect ones. He drove a nail too hard once, splitting the wood slightly. He paused, adjusted, learned the pressure. Otis noticed. Didn't comment. Just nodded once. Ash, meanwhile, proved himself less flawless than memory might have suggested. At one point, he suddenly darted toward a corner of the yard, barking sharply and pawing at the ground. Rowan moved quickly, instincts snapping into place, only to find a nest of mice scattering in panic. Ash froze, then stepped back, ears flicking once as if recalibrating. Mara laughed under her breath. "Even the best miss sometimes," she said. Later, Ash growled low at the base of a tree. Rowan approached again. A raccoon scrambled up the trunk and disappeared into the branches above. Rowan exhaled. "Yeah," he muttered. "We're all a little off today." Ash looked at him, not defensive, just present. Hours passed without being counted. The porch began to look less like it would collapse under a strong opinion. The front windows cleared, letting more light into the house. And the place didn't transform, but it shifted, from abandoned to occupied. Then, Ash stopped moving. It happened so quietly Rowan didn't notice at first, but Mara did. "Rowan," she said softly. He turned. Ash stood at the edge of the yard, facing the shed, not barking, not moving, just there, still. Rowan walked toward him slowly. "Hey," he said. Ash didn't react. Otis came up behind them, hands in his pockets. He hummed. Rowan glanced back. "What?" Otis nodded toward the shed. "She didn't keep what mattered in the house," he said. Rowan frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" Otis shrugged one shoulder. "Say, means if she wanted something found." "She didn't make it easy." Rowan looked at the shed, then at Ash. And for the first time, it didn't feel like he had come here to fix a house. It felt like he had walked into something that had already been waiting for him. Rowan didn't go to the shed. Not yet. He stayed where he was, standing beside Ash, letting the moment settle instead of forcing it forward. Because somewhere deep in his chest, that same quiet voice from before returned. Not loud, not urgent, just steady. And for the first time since he arrived, Rowan understood something simple. He wasn't just staying, he was beginning. Rowan did not go to the shed that evening. He could have. The distance between the porch and that leaning wooden structure was no more than 30 steps. And yet it felt like crossing into something that required a different kind of readiness. Not physical, not even mental. Something quieter than that. So he waited. The sky dimmed slowly, bleeding from pale gold into a soft, cold blue. The lake mirrored it all without comment, holding the light longer than the land. Mara had already left, her departure as simple as her arrival. One nod, one last look at Rowan, as if measuring something she chose not to name. Otis stayed longer. He didn't talk much after that moment in the yard. He helped stack the last of the tools, adjusted a loose board on the porch without being asked, then leaned his weight against one of the posts and watched the lake. "She used to sit out here," he said after a while. "Right there." He pointed toward a worn chair near the edge of the porch. "Same time every night. Didn't matter the season." Rowan followed his gaze. "What for?" Otis shrugged slightly. "Listening, I guess." "To what?" Otis didn't answer right away. "Depends who you ask," he said finally. "Some would say the water. Others would say her own thoughts." He pushed himself upright, brushing dust from his hands. "Now you don't rush into places that have been waiting," he added, glancing toward the shed. "They'll still be there in the morning." Then he left. Just like that. No goodbye speech, no instructions. Rowan stood alone again. Ash lingered near the edge of the yard, eyes still drifting back to the shed. But he didn't move toward it. Not this time. Not in the dark. That was enough for Rowan. They went inside. The house creaked as the night settled around it. Rowan found a lantern in one of the drawers, wiped the dust from its glass, and lit it with a steady hand. The warm glow softened the sharp edges of the room, turning shadows into something less threatening. He ate little. Bread from the tin Otis had brought. Water from a bottle he'd carried with him. Ash stayed close, lying near the door, head resting on his paws but eyes open longer than usual. Rowan stretched out on the couch again, the same place as the night before. But this time, something had shifted. He wasn't just passing through the space. He was occupying it. That thought followed him into sleep. Morning came colder. A thin layer of frost had settled over the yard, clinging to the grass and the edges of the porch like something temporary that hadn't yet decided whether to stay. Rowan stepped outside, breath visible in the air, boots crunching lightly beneath him. Ash moved ahead of him, not running, not hesitant, just certain. The shed. Rowan didn't call him back. He followed. The closer they got, the more the structure revealed itself. The wood was warped, the hinges rusted, one corner leaning enough to suggest it wouldn't survive another harsh winter without attention. The door hung slightly open. Ash reached it first. He paused, nose lifting, drawing in the air. Then he stepped inside. Rowan stopped just outside for a moment. The smell reached him before the details did. Old wood, damp earth, a faint trace of something sharper, oil, maybe, or metal. He stepped in. The light was weaker here, filtering through a small clouded window that let in just enough to shape the shadows without dispelling them. Dust hung in the air, disturbed only by Ash's movement. The shed was small, 14 by 20 maybe, simple, functional. Tools lined the walls, most of them old, some rusted, others still intact. A row of wooden-handled shovels. A rake missing half its teeth. Coiled rope hanging from a nail, a workbench against the far wall, cluttered but not chaotic. This wasn't neglect. This was abandonment. There was a difference. Rowan stepped further in, boots stirring the dust, and Ash moved to the right side of the shed, near the wall where several burlap sacks had been piled. He sniffed once, twice, then pawed lightly at the edge of one. Not urgent, but insistent. Rowan approached slowly. "All right," he murmured. He crouched, gripping the top of the first sack and pulling it aside. It was lighter than it looked. The contents long gone or settled into something insignificant. Nothing beneath. Ash didn't move. Rowan reached for the second sack. This one resisted slightly, heavier but still manageable. He dragged it back, revealing only more worn wood beneath. He exhaled quietly. "You're sure about this?" Ash's ears flicked. No movement, just presence. Rowan moved the third sack. This one shifted differently. There was a weight beneath it that didn't belong to fabric or dirt. Rowan's hand paused. Slowly, deliberately, he pulled the sack aside. And there it was. A small tin trunk. Faded green, paint worn thin at the edges, leather straps cracked but intact. A brass padlock held it shut, dulled by time but still functional. Rowan stared at it. He didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, he sat back slightly on his heels, studying the object like it might change if he looked at it long enough. Ash stepped closer. He didn't touch the trunk. He simply sat beside it, waiting. Rowan hadn't known what he was looking for. But the moment he saw the trunk, something inside him shifted. Not like finding something lost, but like being found. Rowan stood, lifting the trunk carefully. It was heavier than it should have been for its size, and he carried it out of the shed and back toward the house, each step measured, as if the ground itself required acknowledgement. Inside, he set it on the kitchen table. The light was better here, clearer, more honest. Ash remained at his side, watching. Rowan ran a hand over the surface of the trunk, feeling the grooves, the imperfections, the quiet history pressed into metal and leather. "All right," he said softly. "Let's see what you left behind." He tried the latch. Locked, of course. Rowan exhaled through his nose, glancing around the room. "Key," he muttered. Ash shifted. Not toward the trunk this time, toward the living room. Rowan followed. The shelves were lined with old books and notebooks, some leaning, some stacked, all carrying the same thin layer of time. Rowan began pulling them down one by one, flipping through pages that smelled of ink and age. Then, a small cloth-bound journal, different from the others, darker, more worn. He opened it. The handwriting was unmistakable. Eleanor's. Neat, precise, consistent. He flipped through pages filled with notes, dates, observations, small sketches of plants, water levels, weather patterns. A life recorded not in events but in attention. Rowan slowed. Something tugged at his memory. The back cover. He turned to it. And there, taped carefully inside, a small brass key, attached with a strip of faded ribbon. Under it, in Eleanor's hand, a single line. "For Rowan. When the time is right." Rowan didn't breathe for a second. Then he did. Slowly. Ash stood beside him, closer now. Rowan took the key. His fingers felt different holding it, not heavier, but anchored. He walked back to the kitchen. The trunk waited exactly where he had left it. Unchanged. Patient. Rowan inserted the key into the lock. It fit perfectly. Of course it did. He turned it. A soft click. Not loud, but final. Rowan paused, not out of fear, out of respect. Then he opened the trunk. Inside, layers, carefully arranged. On top, several leather-bound ledgers, their covers worn but intact. Rowan lifted one, opening it to find page after page of detailed entries. Plantings, harvests, water measurements, notes about soil conditions. Decades of work. Not guesses, not estimates, knowledge. Beneath them, a small velvet pouch. Rowan opened it. Gold. 12 coins. Old, heavy, real. He turned one in his hand, watching the light catch its surface. A woman's profile. An eagle. Not wealth. Not exactly. Something else. Under the pouch. An envelope. Sealed. His name written across it. Rowan Hale. In the same careful script. He opened it slowly. The paper inside was thinner. The ink slightly faded. But the words were clear. "Rowan, I do not know when you will read this, but I know that one day you will need a place that does not ask you to be anything other than what you are." Rowan swallowed. His eyes moved across the page. This house is not for hiding. It is for beginning again. He stopped reading for a moment. His hand tightened slightly on the paper. Ash moved closer, not pressing, just there. Rowan lowered himself into the chair beside the table. He read the letter once, then again, and somewhere between the second and third time, the weight he had been carrying shifted, not gone, but no longer crushing. He placed the letter down carefully, his head lowered, resting against his hand, and for the first time in years, He didn't feel like something had been taken from him. He felt like something had been left. Ash lay down beside him, close enough that Rowan could feel the warmth through his sleeve. No movement, no noise, just presence. And in that quiet, Rowan understood something simple. He hadn't come here to disappear. He had come here to start. The first thing Rowan learned was that starting over had a price. Not the kind measured in coins alone, but in choices. He stood in the small office of a coin dealer 2 towns over, the kind of place that looked like it had existed quietly for decades without ever needing to announce itself. The windows were clean but not polished. The shelves held trays of old currency, watches, and small objects that had outlived the people who once valued them. Behind the counter stood a man named Harold Finch. Harold was in his late 50s, with a narrow face and sharp features that gave him a permanently calculating look, and his hair, once dark, had gone thin and gray at the temples, combed carefully as if precision could compensate for time. He wore a vest over a pale shirt, sleeves rolled just enough to suggest work without ever appearing messy. His eyes were quick, too quick to be careless. He turned one of the gold coins under a small lamp, examining it with a jeweler's loupe. "Liberty Head," he said, voice neutral. "Late 1800s. Good condition." Rowan stood across from him, arms relaxed at his sides, saying nothing. Harold glanced up briefly. "You've got a few of these?" "Enough." Harold gave a small, knowing nod. If most people who walk in with a few don't understand what they're holding. Rowan met his gaze. "I'm not most people." That hung there for a moment. Harold set the coin down gently. "I can offer you 11,000 for 3, he said. Rowan didn't respond immediately. He had expected more. Not by much, but enough to feel the difference. "Market's been unstable," Harold added, already anticipating resistance. "Condition isn't perfect. I'm taking a risk." Rowan knew that tone. He'd heard it before in different forms, in different places. Men explaining why something was worth less than it was. He looked at the coins again, then back at Harold. "All right," he said. No argument, and no negotiation. Harold blinked once, just enough to show he hadn't expected that either. "All right," he repeated. The transaction was quick after that. Cash, receipt. No conversation beyond necessity. Rowan walked out with less money than he had imagined and more clarity than he had before. Back at the lake house, the numbers didn't stretch as far as they needed to. The roof needed work. Not immediately catastrophic, but close enough. The beams had softened in one corner, and the shingles were loose enough that another winter would push them past recovery. The garden, or what used to be one, was another problem entirely. Overgrown, choked, the soil uneven, patches of rot mixed with places that still held life under the surface. Rowan stood between the two. Roof or ground, shelter or growth. Ash stood beside him, watching. "You don't get both," Rowan muttered. Ash's ears flicked once. Not an answer, just acknowledgement. Rowan exhaled slowly. "All right," he said. "We start with what keeps us alive." The roof. The work was slower than he expected. Not because he couldn't do it, but because he wasn't used to doing it alone. He measured twice, cut once, climbed carefully, adjusted weight without thinking. His body remembered how to move under pressure. But this wasn't pressure. This was patience. And Ash stayed below most of the time, circling the yard, occasionally stopping to watch Rowan on the roof as if calculating angles and outcomes in a way only he understood. By the third day, Rowan's hands were raw. By the fifth, the roof held. Not perfect, but solid. Enough. He climbed down at dusk, boots hitting the ground with a dull, final thud. Ash approached immediately, sniffing his hands, then his jacket, checking him in a way that had nothing to do with curiosity and everything to do with habit. "Yeah," Rowan said quietly. "Still here." The garden was different. There was no straight line to follow, no clear objective. Just earth. And Rowan stood at its edge the next morning, shovel in hand, staring at something that didn't respond to force the way most things in his life had. That's when he heard the truck. Slower this time. He turned as it came up the road, dust rising behind it in a soft cloud. The man who stepped out looked like he belonged to the land in a way Rowan immediately recognized. Caleb Dunn was in his late 40s, broad-shouldered but not heavy, the kind of strength built over years of physical work rather than training. His face was sun-worn, lines set deep from time spent outdoors, and his beard was short, uneven, more practical than styled. His eyes were a warm brown, steady and patient. He wore a brown work jacket stained in places no amount of washing could remove, a faded shirt beneath, dark work pants, and boots that carried dirt as naturally as skin. He took in the yard with a single glance. Then Rowan. "You're doing it wrong," Caleb said. Not harsh, not mocking. Just stating a fact. Rowan didn't take offense. "Good to know," he replied. "You gonna tell me how to do it right?" Caleb walked closer, boots sinking slightly into the softer patches of ground. He crouched, pressing his hand into the soil. "Too much water here," he said, nodding toward a darker patch. "You're drowning it." Rowan frowned slightly. "I thought it needed more." Caleb shook his head. "Plants don't need more," he said. "They need balance." He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "Your grandmother understood that." Rowan looked at him. "You knew her?" Caleb gave a small nod. "She helped my mother once, long time ago. Didn't charge a thing. I just told her to bring something back when she could." He glanced around the garden again. "I figure this is me bringing something back." Ash suddenly moved, fast, sharp, crossing the yard and stopping at a patch of ground Rowan had just watered. He didn't bark. He didn't dig. He just stood there, staring down at the soil like it had said something. And for a brief moment, Rowan felt it too. Not a sound, not a movement, just a quiet certainty that something beneath the surface wasn't right. Caleb walked over, following Ash's gaze. "Yeah," he murmured. "That's where it's off." He nudged the ground with the toe of his boot. "Too wet," he said. "Roots'll rot." Rowan stepped closer. He hadn't seen it before. Now he did. A subtle difference in color, in texture. He exhaled. "All right," he said quietly. "Show me." The days that followed didn't look like progress. At least not the kind Rowan was used to. He made mistakes, overwatered again, cut a branch too close to the base, killing something that might have lived, misjudged timing. Caleb didn't correct everything immediately. Sometimes he let Rowan fail first. "Better you see it," he said once, watching Rowan stare at a withering plant. "That way you remember." Ash adapted. He learned the boundaries of this new kind of work. Sometimes he got it right. Pausing at patches of ground that were too damp, sniffing areas Rowan hadn't checked yet. Other times he hesitated, uncertain, looking back at Rowan instead of leading. And in those moments, Rowan understood. They were both learning something new. The call came in the evening. Rowan was at the sink, rinsing dirt from his hands, when the phone vibrated against the counter. He didn't need to look at the name. He already knew. Claire. The sound filled the small kitchen in a way that didn't belong. Ash lifted his head immediately, ears forward. Rowan stared at the phone for 3 rings. 4. Then he picked it up. "Yeah." A pause, then her voice. "Rowan." Same tone, the same control, but something underneath it, less steady. "I heard you're up north," she said. "At that property." Rowan didn't answer. "I also heard," she continued carefully, "that there's value there, more than we thought." There it was. Not memory, not regret. Information. Rowan leaned back slightly against the counter. "You didn't call to ask how I am." It wasn't a question. Claire exhaled softly. "I thought we could talk." "About what?" Another pause, then, "About reconsidering things." Rowan closed his eyes for a second. Not out of pain, out of recognition. He had spent years believing what they had was something real. Now, hearing her like this, he understood what it had been, and what it hadn't. "No," he said. Simple, final. Silence stretched on the other end. Then Claire spoke again, quieter. "You're making a mistake." Rowan looked out the window, at the yard, at the uneven ground, at Ash, sitting just beyond the porch, watching the horizon like it mattered. "Maybe," Rowan said. Then he ended the call. He stood there for a long moment after, not moving, not thinking, just letting the absence settle. Ash walked back toward him, stopping a few feet away. Not rushing, not pressing. Rowan looked down at him. Then slowly, something shifted behind his eyes. Not anger, not relief. Understanding. What Rowan lost that morning in the city wasn't love. It was the version of himself that had learned to stay where he didn't belong. He stepped outside. The air had cooled again, the edge of night settling in. Rowan walked to the edge of the garden, boots sinking slightly into the soil. It wasn't fixed, not even close. But it wasn't dead either. Ash stood beside him, not leading, not warning, just there. Rowan exhaled slowly. "All right," he said under his breath. "We keep going." Summer did not arrive gently. It came with heat that settled into the ground and refused to leave, with long days that stretched work into exhaustion and nights that offered little in return. The air thickened. The soil hardened in some places and turned sour in others. And Rowan began to understand something Caleb had not needed to say out loud. This land would not reward effort blindly. It demanded understanding, and Rowan didn't have enough of it yet. The money ran thinner than he had planned. Supplies cost more, repairs took longer. Small mistakes added up in ways that didn't feel small when he counted what was left in the envelope at the end of each week. The garden fought him. Some patches held, others died quietly. Leaves yellowed where they shouldn't, roots softened where they should have held firm. Rowan adjusted, corrected, tried again. But every lesson came with a cost. By mid-July, his hands were cut in places he hadn't noticed happening. His shoulders ached constantly. Sleep came, but not deeply. Ash stayed with him through all of it. Not as a solution, as a presence. The German shepherd moved through the yard with a quieter rhythm now, no longer reacting sharply to every unfamiliar scent, but still attentive, still watching. His instincts remained, but even those seemed to adjust to the uncertainty around them. Some days, he was right. Yet he would pause near a patch of soil, nose low, lingering just long enough for Rowan to notice. And when Rowan checked, the ground would be too damp, too soft, already starting to fail beneath the surface. Other days, Ash hesitated, standing still, looking back, waiting. And Rowan had to decide without him. Those were the harder moments, because they reminded him this wasn't a mission. There was no clear objective, no command to follow, just choice and consequence. Caleb came and went without schedule. Sometimes he stayed for hours, showing Rowan how to read the ground, not just by sight but by feel, pressing fingers into soil, lifting small clumps, letting them fall apart in his palm. Too tight, Caleb would say. Roots can't breathe. Or, too loose, nothing holds. He didn't lecture, he corrected. And sometimes, he said nothing at all, which, Rowan learned, meant he was supposed to figure it out himself. One afternoon, after Rowan had overwatered a section again, Caleb stood beside him, arms crossed loosely. "You're trying to force it," he said. Rowan wiped sweat from his brow, jaw tightening slightly. "I'm trying to keep it alive." Caleb nodded. "Yeah," he said, "and that's the problem." Rowan looked at him. Caleb crouched, pressing his hand into the damp soil. "You don't keep it alive," he said quietly. "You give it a chance to live." He stood again, brushing dirt from his palms. Big difference. Then he walked back toward his truck, leaving Rowan alone with something that felt less like instruction and more like a question. By late July, the weight began to settle in deeper. Not physical. Something heavier. Rowan stood in the yard one evening, looking over what he had managed to restore, and what he hadn't. The patches of green were there, but so were the empty spaces, the dead sections, the uneven ground that refused to cooperate no matter how carefully he worked it. The house stood behind him, stronger than before, but still incomplete. The money was nearly gone, and the land was only half awake. And Rowan was tired in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. That night, he packed. Not quickly, not in panic. The same way he had packed before. Deliberate, minimal. He folded his clothes, placed them into the worn duffel he had carried through deployments and back again. He checked the envelope of money, counted it once, then again. Ash watched from the doorway, silent, still. Rowan moved through the house, collecting what he had brought and leaving what belonged to the place. The letter stayed. The journal stayed. The trunk remained where it was. When he stepped onto the porch, the air felt cooler than it had all day. The lake reflected the last of the light, holding on to something Rowan couldn't name. He walked down the steps. Ash followed. The truck waited where it always had. Rowan opened the driver's door, set the duffel inside, paused, then turned back. Ash stood a few feet away, not blocking, not moving, just watching. Rowan held his gaze. Seconds passed, then more. Ash didn't step forward, didn't bark, didn't signal. He simply stayed there, eyes steady, unblinking, present, and in that silence, Rowan felt something he hadn't expected. Not resistance, not pressure, something else. Time, as if the moment itself was asking him to sit inside it a little longer before deciding what it meant. Rowan exhaled slowly. His hand rested on the edge of the truck door. Then he closed it. The sound was quiet, final in a way that didn't need force. He picked up the duffel, walked back toward the house, and Ash turned and moved ahead of him without hesitation. Ash hadn't stopped him, hadn't tried to control the moment. He had simply stayed and let Rowan decide who he was going to be. The next morning, Rowan didn't feel stronger. He didn't feel renewed. He felt the same. But something underneath it had shifted. Not confidence, commitment, and that was enough. It was Mara who brought the story. She arrived mid-morning, her truck pulling in with the same steady presence as before. This time, she didn't get out right away. She sat for a moment, watching Rowan work from a distance. When she stepped out, she walked slower, thoughtful. "There's a woman in town," she said after greeting him. "Name's Ruth Callahan." Rowan looked up from the soil. "Okay." Mara folded her arms lightly. "She heard your name," she continued. "Your grandmother's name." Rowan straightened slightly. "And?" Mara studied him for a moment before answering. "She said Eleanor saved her farm." That landed differently. Rowan didn't speak. Mara continued. "Years ago, drought hit harder than expected, soil cracked, crops failed. Everyone around her started selling off land, cutting losses." She shifted her weight. "Eleanor didn't?" Rowan's brow tightened slightly. "What did she do?" Mara gave a faint smile. "She showed Ruth where to dig." They drove into town together, and the place was small, quieter than it had been when Rowan passed through before. The buildings stood close together, paint faded in places, signs worn but still readable. Ruth Callahan's property sat just beyond the edge of town. A modest farmhouse, older but maintained with care. The land around it stretched wider than Rowan expected. Green where his wasn't. Stable where his felt uncertain. Ruth met them outside. She was in her late 60s, tall but slightly stooped, her gray hair pulled back into a loose braid that rested over one shoulder. Her skin carried the marks of years spent outdoors, weathered but not worn down. Her eyes were sharp, observant, the kind that missed very little. She looked at Rowan for a long moment before speaking. "You're Eleanor's," she said. Not a question. Rowan nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Ruth stepped closer, studying his face as if searching for something familiar. "She used to say one of you would come back," she said quietly. "Didn't know which one?" Rowan felt something shift in his chest. "What did she do?" he asked. Ruth smiled faintly. "She listened," she said. "More than most." She turned, gesturing toward the far edge of her land. "Come on," she added. "I'll show you." They walked across the field, the ground firm beneath their feet. Ruth stopped near a patch that didn't look different at first glance, but Ash noticed, and he stepped forward, nose low, circling once before stopping at a single point. He inhaled deeply, then sat. Ruth nodded. "Yeah," she said softly. "Right there." Rowan frowned slightly. "What is it?" "Water," Ruth replied. "Underground. Runs shallow through this part of the land. Eleanor found it when no one else could." Rowan crouched, pressing his hand into the soil. It felt different. Cooler. Damp. But not soaked. Balanced. He looked at Ash. The dog held his position, steady, certain. Rowan exhaled slowly. They returned to the house later that afternoon. Rowan stood at the edge of his own garden again, seeing it differently now. Not as failure, not as unfinished, as something still in motion. Ash moved beside him, quieter now, but more aligned. Rowan looked out over the uneven ground, then down at his hands, then back at the land. Rowan didn't stay because he was strong. He stayed because for the first time in a long time, something here needed him, and he knew how to answer that. 3 summers passed without announcement. They didn't arrive all at once, nor did they transform the land overnight. Change came in layers, quiet, patient, almost reluctant to be noticed at first. The roof no longer sagged. The porch held steady under weight. The windows stayed clean, not because Rowan forced them to be, but because he had learned to maintain rather than repair. The house no longer felt paused. It felt lived in. Rowan stood on the porch in the early morning light, hands resting loosely on the railing, watching the lake shift from gray to blue. The air carried that same mix of cedar and water he remembered from childhood. But now, it no longer felt like memory. It felt like presence. At 46, Rowan still carried the same frame, broad shoulders, steady posture, but time had softened the sharp edges of him. Not physically. His face still held its angles, the faint scars unchanged, the stubble still lining his jaw. But there was something quieter in his eyes now. Less distance, more recognition. He no longer scanned the world for threats. He watched it for patterns. Behind him, the house stirred. A kettle clicked softly in the kitchen. Floorboards shifted under familiar weight. The small routines of a place that had accepted him. Ash stepped out a moment later. The German shepherd moved slower now. Not weak, just deliberate. His black and tan coat had grayed slightly around the muzzle, the edges of time visible but not diminishing. His body remained strong, though the sharpness of his movements had softened. Where once he reacted instantly, now he considered first. But his eyes? His eyes hadn't changed. Still deep, still focused, still aware in a way that didn't rely on speed. He walked to Rowan's side and lowered himself carefully to the porch floor, positioning himself exactly where he always had. Close enough to feel Rowan's presence, far enough not to crowd it. Rowan glanced down. "Morning," he said quietly. Ash's ears flicked once. That was enough. The garden had become something else entirely. What had once been uneven ground and uncertain growth now stretched in quiet rows. Not rigid, not controlled, but guided. Native plants filled the space, chosen not for appearance but for balance. Flowers that returned without force. Herbs that held their place through changing seasons. Soil that no longer resisted. Rowan didn't call it a garden anymore. Caleb had corrected him once. "This isn't a garden," he'd said, leaning against the fence one afternoon. "Gardens are for people. This," he gestured to the land, "this is something that knows how to live without you. You're just helping it remember." Caleb Dunn still came by. Not as often. And not because he wasn't needed, but because he wasn't required anymore. He arrived one afternoon in early fall, his truck pulling in slower than before, dust rising gently behind him. He stepped out the same way he always had, boots hitting the ground with quiet certainty, his brown work jacket worn thinner now at the elbows, his beard carrying more gray than Rowan remembered from the first time they met. He walked the land without speaking. That was his way. He crouched once, pressing his fingers into the soil, then stood again, brushing his hands off slowly. "Yeah," he said. Rowan leaned against the fence nearby. "Yeah, what?" Caleb glanced at him. You stopped trying to control it," he replied. Rowan exhaled softly. "Took me long enough." Caleb gave a small shrug. "Some people never get there." Rowan had started working with dogs again. Not in the way he used to. No deployments, no structured commands shouted across open terrain. Something smaller, something closer. A local volunteer program had asked him to help train search and rescue dogs for low-risk operations. Lost hikers, missing campers, situations where patience mattered more than force. Rowan had said yes. Not because he missed it, because he understood it differently now. The training field sat just beyond the edge of town, a wide stretch of land marked by uneven terrain and scattered tree lines. That's where he met Daniel Pike. Daniel was in his early 30s, tall but slightly hunched in posture, as if he had grown faster than his confidence could keep up. His blonde hair was cut short but uneven, his face still carrying the softness of someone who hadn't fully settled into himself yet. His hands moved quickly when he spoke, as if trying to keep pace with thoughts that arrived faster than he could organize them. He handled a young shepherd mix named Lila. The dog was barely 2, lean, energetic, her movements sharp but inconsistent. Her coat was a mix of tan and black, not as refined as Ash's, but her eyes held the same intensity. Curious, searching, sometimes unsure. Daniel struggled. Not with effort, with patience. "She's not listening," he said one afternoon, frustration tightening his voice. Rowan stood beside him, arms folded loosely. "She is," Rowan replied. Daniel frowned. "Then why isn't she doing what I'm telling her?" Rowan nodded toward Lila. "Because you're telling her what you want," he said. "Not what she understands." Daniel blinked. Rowan stepped forward, crouching slightly, lowering himself to Lila's level without reaching for her. He waited. The dog shifted, watched him, then moved closer on her own. Rowan glanced back at Daniel. "Don't lead," he said quietly. "Be where they need to come to." Daniel didn't answer, but he listened. Ash stood at the edge of the training field that day, watching, not stepping in, not correcting. And Rowan realized something he hadn't seen before. Ash wasn't guiding anymore. He was choosing to stay. The shift was subtle, but once Rowan saw it, he couldn't unsee it. Ash no longer moved first. He no longer anticipated every decision, and instead he positioned himself where Rowan needed him to be. Quiet, steady, present. Not leading, not correcting, just there. And somehow, that mattered more. The town had accepted Rowan in the way small places do, without ceremony, without announcement. People stopped asking where he came from. They started asking how things were going. Ruth still sent produce when her harvest ran strong. Mara stopped by less often, but when she did, she stayed longer, sitting on the porch with Rowan in the evenings, watching the lake the same way Eleanor once had. Otis had grown quieter. Age had settled deeper into his bones, his movements slower, his visits less frequent, but more deliberate. He came one evening just before sunset, carrying nothing this time. No tools, no food, just himself. He sat on the porch beside Rowan, both of them facing the water. "You did all right," Otis said after a long silence. Rowan shook his head slightly. "Still working on it." Otis let out a soft breath. "That's the point," he replied. The sun lowered slowly. The lake caught the light, turning it into something warmer, deeper. Ash lay at Rowan's feet, his body relaxed but aligned, as if even in rest, he understood where he belonged. Rowan rested his hands on his knees, gaze fixed on the horizon. For a moment, he allowed himself to look back, not in regret, in recognition. The morning in the kitchen, the folder, the silence that followed, the road that led him here. He had thought that was the end, that something had been taken from him, stripped away, left behind. But sitting here now, with the house behind him, the land before him, the quiet weight of presence at his side, Rowan understood. Nothing had been taken. What had been removed was something that no longer belonged to him. He hadn't lost his life that morning. He had been given back the part of it that had been waiting all along. The light faded. The air cooled. The lake settled into darkness without resistance. Rowan leaned back slightly in his chair, eyes still on the horizon. The ash shifted closer, resting fully against his leg now, not out of need, but out of choice. Rowan reached down, resting his hand lightly on the dog's neck, no command, no expectation, just contact. And in that quiet moment, there was no question left about where he belonged. Sometimes the miracle isn't loud. It doesn't arrive like a storm or a sudden answer. It comes quietly, like a road you didn't plan to take, a place you almost walked away from, or a moment when everything seems broken. But something in you decides to stay. Maybe that's how God works. Not by giving us everything we asked for, but by guiding us back to what we were meant to find. A purpose we forgot, a strength we didn't know we still had, a place where our life finally makes sense again. Rowan thought he had lost everything, but what he really lost was the life that wasn't meant for him, and what he found was the one God had been preparing all along. If you're watching this right now and you feel lost or tired or like something in your life has ended, don't rush to leave the place you're in. Sometimes the beginning is hidden inside the ending. Sometimes the answer is already around you, waiting for you to notice it. And sometimes the miracle is simply this: you are still here, and your story is not finished. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs it. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what part of your life you're still fighting through. And if you believe stories like this matter, subscribe to the channel so we can keep telling them together. May God watch over you, guide your steps, and give you peace in the places you need it most.